Hello, hello, beautiful soul. Welcome to this exploratory video where we're going to look at the gene keys using the MCU characters and story arcs as our examples for how these heroes navigate their shadows, their gifts, their leadership with these gifts specifically. And it's going to be so much fun. So, a little introduction to me if this is the first time we are connecting. My name is Rachel White. I am a Gene Keys guide, a coach, author, many other things as well. My experience with the Gene Keys, I was first introduced to them early 2020 or mid to early 2020, and I instantly felt such a deep resonance with the poetic nature, with the creativity, with all the really beautiful aspects of the Gene Keys, the way that it moves through shadow work, the way that it provides this framework for you to feel for me, I felt seen and understood. And I felt like it provided a clear path forward to unlock these gifts within me and also connect with my own wisdom. And after I did a dive into all my active gene keys within my personal profile, I started to explore the wider context of the gene keys and really started to dive deep into all of the gene keys, which build the fabric of our collective humanity in the background. And I really started to notice all of the stories within the gene keys, within my favorite characters. And I love the MCU. I love all of the characters and the stories. And I really started to see a lot of the gene key story arcs within the MCU characters' story arcs. And that's because like the 64 gene keys are the 64 story codes of humanity. So when you really start to tune into them, you start to see their stories everywhere. And I think it gives us really cool archetypes to play with, to really see how some of these shadows and gifts and the whole gene keys manifest. And that can help us connect to our own gifts when we can see the story arcs play out in an entertaining way. So let's get into it. Okay. So for this first week, this first video, I want to give just a little introduction to the gene keys. I know that a lot of you who will be watching this will already be familiar with the gene keys, but I wanted to just give a little introduction. And if this is your first time hearing about the gene keys, there are so many more resources to explore. Come and follow me at Gene Keys with Rachel on Instagram. You can send me a message there. You can get to my website through that page as well. I have so much content available, and also, reach out to me. I would love to have a chat about you if you want to look at exploring the gene keys and your gene keys for the first time. So the gene keys, in a very summarized explanation, is a poetic framework that depicts the 64 story codes of evolution. So there are 64 gene keys, and these are based on the 64 hexagrams in the I Ching, which is an ancient framework that was built in China thousands and thousands of years ago. And that has been developed, expanded on in many different ways, including human design. And then the Gene Keys was built on the back of human design as well. So it has a really rich history. And I have, the bottom text there is I really honor the sacred roots. Richard Rudd, who was the founder of the Gene Keys, and he calls himself the first student of the Gene Keys. I really honor the work he did in bringing this transmission to life in such a beautiful, contemporary, and poetic way that allows thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people to connect with it in the resonance that they have in the way that I have as well. And I really honor the I Ching for being the very deep sacred roots and all who have contributed everything that this transmission has grown from. Like I really, really honor the roots, and I honor everyone who contributed to putting it in a format that we get to play with in this way now. So there are the gene keys, the entire framework of the gene keys, which is the 64, and then you have your personal gene keys profile. And I have the little image here is what your profile will look like. and which is your mapped out imprint, your mapped out cosmic imprint. And then in each of those spheres, the circles that you see there, you will have an active gene key that correlates to different realms and areas of your life. So your gene keys profile maps out your interwoven stories for your personal evolution in the realms of your creativity, your genius, your physical grounding in life, your love, your healing journey, your journey of service and prosperity, and many more facets of your life as well. And we can look at your profile is generally broken up into 3 sequences: the activation, the Venus, and the Pearl. You can look at it through the sequences, and you can also look at it as one interwoven big picture, which I love to do as well. And there are many roads in. Generally, you start at the top in the life's work and move through, but all portals are doorways and all entry points are valid, so you can completely follow your curiosity. But when you look at your profile, you'll see your active gene keys. And even though we have a connection to all 64 of the gene keys, the 11 gene keys, up to 11 gene keys that we have active in our profile, are ones that carry more potency and intensity for us. So if you have the gene keys that we're going to talk about in this video, if you have them, you may feel extra resonance to them. But if you don't have them, you still will feel an intuitive connection through how you see them play out in others. But you may also just have an intuitive connection within yourself for those gene keys as well. So your active gene keys are ones that have a lot of potency for you to explore, but you don't need to get too hung up on like, this is my gene key and this isn't. So each of the 64 gene keys has a shadow, a gift, and a siddhi, and this builds the spectrum of consciousness. So there are 64 shadows, 64 gifts, 64 siddhis, and the journey from the shadow, the gift, to the siddhi illustrates the evolution of the journey, so the story arc, and we're going to talk a lot about story arcs in here. And it also illustrates the polarity. The shadow and the gift are polar energies, but also the shadow and the siddhi are polar energies, with the gift in the middle of the spectrum. You can look at it in a few different ways. So when we have these beautiful gifts that are such high frequency, the laws of polarity of the universe means there has to be an equally polar charge. So because the gifts are so beautiful and magic and amazing, the shadows can feel deep, intense, and a little dark because they're the polar charge of the gift, but they are one in the same. Like I like to look at it as a circle that actually connects. And the shadow, the siddhi, and the gift, they hold the same energy. They just get expressed in different ways depending on our frequency, our attitude, and how we view them. But they are ultimately the same thing and part of the same journey, and are necessary. The shadows are necessary for us to fully embrace and manifest our gifts into our lives. A little more on the siddhi, gift, and shadow here. So the siddhi is the divine fractal of source. It is the superpower. And when we look at I feel like the gene keys stories are really easy to recognize within the MCU, within superheroes, because they have superpowers. So their siddhi is a little more obvious at times for us to recognize. And I feel like this is why there is such a deep resonance with these MCU movies, even with comic books, with superheroes, because we feel these superpowers inside of us. Like we feel this divine connection to these out of worldly powers that are beyond our current human experience, that when we recognize them in superheroes, like we feel this deep resonance to them. So the siddhi is the divine fractal. And if you imagine like source energy fractures into 64 different paths. So the siddhi is very close to source energy. And that's why sometimes if you've explored your gene keys and the siddhi feels a little too out there, it's because it is, a direct line to source. But as those energies, imagine like the ball of source, and as those energies move out and come down to earth, they start to pave out. So like they're so close together when they fracture from source, but then they move out. And that's why the gifts are the unique aspect of the gene keys. The gifts are the way, the gifts are the journey, the gifts are the human manifestation of the superpower. They are also the way through the shadow. They are the journey, and they are the experience we have when we are in a high frequency connected to that fractal line from source. And then the shadow is the distortion of the siddhi. And the shadow represents a necessary challenge for our evolution in order to embrace the gift. The shadow and the gift are of the same energy. It's often a frequency shift or an attitude shift that is needed to move fully into the gift. And often, like, the shadow will provoke us and poke us and do all kinds of things to us. We're going to talk a lot more about the shadow in a moment. But the shadow will do all these things in order to challenge us so that we evolve, so that we grow, so that we actually do embrace our gifts. And it isn't a linear path that it's like you're in the shadow, then you're in the gift, then you transcend or become enlightened to the siddhi. It's very, it's a roller coaster that spirals, that is interwoven. Like, there are many times that even when we unleash our gifts, that the shadow will come back to challenge us, because there's higher frequencies or there's different roads, and our shadows and gifts intertwine with each other as well. It's not like, this is one gene key, I'm going to go on this path, and then the next one. They are interconnected as well. So the path within the gene keys framework that Richard Rudd developed and teaches is the path is to allow, accept, and embrace. When we look at the shadow work within the gene keys, when we first look at the shadow, it's about allowing it. Can we allow that has been the journey we have been on? Can we allow that this shadow is a part of us? Can we just let it be there and acknowledge and allow that it is there? And then we move into acceptance, like actually accepting that this is a part of me. This shadow is a part of me, and it's a part of my story to the gift, and I accept that this is part of me. And then we can move on embracing the shadow, so that we embrace the energy of the shadow, and we can use that energy in our gift expression and in the manifestation of the gift. So to start with, we are going to talk about the Hulk. So for this video, we're going to talk about the Hulk, and we're also going to talk about Spider-Man. And these are just really the preface to what we're going to talk about when we go into the leadership codes of the gene keys, which is the 21st, the 31st, and the 7th gene keys are the 3 core leadership codes. And we're going to talk about which MCU characters I see representing those stories, and talk about some complementary gene keys to those story arcs as well. But now we're going to talk about the shadow journey, and then we're going to talk about the hero's journey with Spider-Man. But to talk about the shadow first, so I think the Hulk, I've always seen the Hulk as a really beautiful representation of how our shadows can play out. And I also want to say that I am basing all of this like analogy on just solely the MCU. I know that like I've heard some things around like in the comics, the reason like the Hulk is like slightly different to the MCU. So I'm not going to cover any of that. It's really about like how the Hulk is represented within the MCU, how I have interpreted it, and you may have different interpretations, and I would love to hear them as well. But this is just like an analogy, and I know that, some things don't match up exactly, but I think it still illustrates a really beautiful example. So when we look at what the shadow is, your shadows are a sacred and innate part of you. They are part of you. It's not something that, comes up, that sneaks in and possesses you. It's not something that you need to get rid of. It is like those thoughts that you need to suppress and reject the shadow that actually make the shadow manifest in an even more distorted and perverted way. You have so much creative energy and creative power and potential inside of you that, again, there needs to be a polar charge to that. And that isn't to say you need to be on like an extreme end of either spectrum, that you can bring integration and balance. But when you're trying to just be the high energy, the light to the high frequency, and you reject and suppress the shadow, that's when it becomes its most distorted. and the distorted version of the shadow will always find a way out. So when the energy of your gifts become distorted, they manifest as shadows. And this is when we deny or suppress part of ourselves that are innate part of ourselves. Those parts will manifest as shadows, and they can manifest in many different ways. And of course, the example of the Hulk is extreme. We're not going to turn into big green monsters, but we are our own version of monsters, or how we see ourselves as a way that is not acceptable to the mental identity that we have of ourselves. So because these parts have been hidden in the dark, or we've tried to push them into a corner or in the dark for so long, they have this deep yearning to come out. And without the full acceptance of the shadow that we are denying, there cannot be like the full acceptance and embrace of the gift that is within that shadow. Within every shadow, there is a gift. But when that shadow part of ourselves is, pushed down and suppressed and rejected and shamed, this part of ourselves, often it needs to find a way to come out. It needs to find a way to provoke us into reminding that this part of ourselves is very real and that it is a part of us. So when the shadow finally gets a chance to come out to the surface, it will do so in a very destructive way, in a very perverted way, because our creative energy is very powerful and it can also be very destructive. And you can look at this as when, you finally have an outburst, or you just, you've wanted to do something that you deem as unacceptable for so long, and then you finally do it, but it actually, destroys a lot of things. And I want you to start kind of reflecting on what you're pushing down and then what it does when it finally comes out. And the thing is that we start to create these cycles, because when it does come out and causes so much destruction, we use that as evidence to push it down even further, until we are provoked to an extreme point where we're like, okay, maybe I need to re-examine how I'm dealing with this, because this is not the relationship I want to have with this part of myself. So when our shadows come out in these extreme ways, it can really make us further reject them, and it doesn't allow us to really burrow down and cultivate the gift that is actually within that shadow. It just continues further cycles of destruction when we reject and suppress and shame the shadow even more. So your shadow is always trying to poke and provoke you until you accept it, until you love it. Your shadow wants to be loved. And we see this in the example of the Hulk as well. The Hulk wants to be loved and accepted by Bruce. And within every shadow there is a gift. That is a sentence that is repeated many times within the Gene Keys framework by Richard Rudd, and by many who explore the Gene Keys. So the shadow will reveal the polarity to the gift, and you always have the capacity for both sides. And so when we accept and embrace the gift, we accept the beautiful, amazing qualities that the shadow has, and we integrate it into the whole of who we are, and we can let go of that excessive charge that makes it destructive in some ways. So let's look at the Hulk's journey throughout the MCU. And so these are the movies and the show She-Hulk that the Hulk has appeared in. Some of them, he has a lot more screen time than others. And I've made just a basic timeline, but we're going to dive into these points to really see the journey that the Hulk has taken. And when I say the Hulk, I mean, of course, Bruce Banner as well. So we start with The Incredible Hulk, and full disclosure, I have never watched this movie in its entirety. I barely consider it a part of the MCU, but I do acknowledge that, some parts of it have been pulled into other aspects of the MCU, so I acknowledge it's there. But I have never fully seen it, but I know the general story, and I've seen clips of it and bits of it. So the basic story of the origin of the Hulk is that Bruce Banner is a basically genius scientist, and through his work in some way, he is exposed to gamma radiation. And through that whole experience, of course, I'm leaving out a lot of details, the Hulk comes out as a big green angry monster whenever Bruce is angry or stressed out. So we can see here that, Bruce is portrayed as a more like timid, inward character. And so being stressed or being angry is a part of what is being shamed and dismissed. And it manifests as the Hulk. And it is also around, like this Bruce being a little more timid and a little more reserved. It's about like a denial of his strength. And so the Hulk comes out to be strong, to defend, and to actually be of service to Bruce. But Bruce doesn't see it in that way at all through the first few movies in the MCU. Like the Hulk is something that Bruce is very ashamed of and actively does not want and tries to suppress in any way that he can. So the Hulk is big, strong, incredibly destructive, like because of his size, because of his anger, and because of the power that comes out when the Hulk comes out. And this is ultimately like the first time that Bruce has this opportunity to express this big, powerful, strong part of himself when the Hulk comes out. Between this movie and the Avengers, I just realized that the images are the wrong way around for Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron. So imagine they are switched in your head. But we learn later, like in Age of Ultron, that between the Incredible Hulk and the Avengers, that Bruce tried to end his life multiple times because of how much he feared the Hulk. So he sees no good and no potential within the Hulk when it first manifests in his life. And of course, we can understand that it is a extreme and scary experience. And even though our own shadow experience doesn't manifest in this, extremely physical way, we still have these moments where a part of us manifests and expresses itself, and we want to shut that down and shove it back in and put it away straight away. So then we move into Avengers again. Imagine the Avengers image is here instead of Age of Ultron 1. So when we meet Bruce, and there's been a recast from the actor that played him in the Incredible Hulk. When we meet Bruce in the Avengers, he is hiding away. He's very much afraid of becoming aggravated enough or stressed enough for the Hulk to come out. So he's hiding away, and then Natasha goes and finds him to recruit him into the Avengers, into the team. And they recruit him like under the guise of wanting Bruce, of wanting his genius and his intellect. And I find it so interesting that in most of the posters it's of Hulk, like not Bruce. Like Hulk is the part of the team of the Avengers. Of course, Bruce like plays a role, but it is the Hulk's strength that is the powerful ally to the Avengers team. So Bruce comes and he joins to help the fight. I encourage you to watch these movies and fill in the gaps if you're not familiar with the MCU. But basically, when the team is all together, Loki, who is the core antagonist of the Avengers, the first Avengers movie, he launches an attack on the Avengers, and they are all threatened. And Bruce is still, fighting to stay in control, to not let the Hulk come out. But then, Natasha knows that like the Hulk is what is needed. So she pushes him down and the Hulk comes out. And when the Hulk comes out, his strength comes out. And this is something that I feel like Bruce fails to recognize, is that when there is danger, the Hulk saves Bruce. The Hulk saves Bruce in situations that he cannot physically handle because he doesn't have the size, the strength, the capacity. So at the end of this movie, the first Avengers movie, we see that Bruce actually knows how to bring the Hulk out at call. And he says that, the secret to getting angry is that he's always angry. So we actually see it really highlighted how he is just always actively putting so much energy into suppressing the Hulk, even though he feels this constant anger bubbling inside of him. So that's the first movie. Really, we see the journey of him just like rejecting the Hulk, but we actually see the strength and the value that the Hulk has within the Avengers team as well. Then we move into Avengers Ultron, and we see the Hulk actually being part of the Avengers team, you know, like the opening scene, or like one of the opening scenes when we see the team all together in Age of Ultron. You know, we see the Hulk working with the Avengers, like actually being a teammate, using his strength in such a powerful and amazing way. But then when Bruce comes back into control, we still see Bruce have such animosity like towards that part of him and towards the Hulk. And then we see the Hulk lose control. Wanda Maximoff does her little mind control on all of the Avengers, and what she does to the Hulk sends him into this rampage across a whole country. I'm pretty sure it was South Africa. And the Hulk, and he destroys a lot, like on, you know, big green monster lost his mind on a massive destructive rampage. And even the Hulk, we see the Hulk himself, like not just Bruce, but we see the Hulk feel this deep shame about the destructiveness that he just caused, because he genuinely wanted to be part of the team and to help and to be accepted and to be loved. And he didn't want to be that destructive monster anymore, but he was mind controlled. And then, so then, you know, the Bruce comes back, the Hulk comes back, the Avengers, you know, save the day. And then at the end of the movie, the Hulk takes off in the spaceship, or in the ship, to cut himself off from Earth. And even though the Avengers are saying, you know, come back, it's okay, you weren't in control, he is feeling that deep shame, and he knows that he needs to leave. And this is where, again, the Hulk protects Bruce, because it is the Hulk who leaves Earth, who goes away and who separates himself, and he is protecting Bruce from feeling the pain and the shame of the destruction that he just caused. So he stays in control. And then fast forward, this is like Thor Ragnarok comes out a couple years later. We see the Hulk again, and we see that the Hulk has been in control. So like Bruce has been suppressed within the Hulk for years at this point. And so time does kind of work differently in the place that they're in. So we don't know how long it's been exactly, but it's been, I think, about like 2 Earth years. Like, someone can correct me if I'm mistaking that. So the Hulk's in control. The Hulk is still protecting Bruce, and we see that the Hulk, having been in control for this extended period of time, like has started to really form some sovereignty, like within who he is. But we still see like this insecurity that he has come out around, you know, like people not liking him. You know, like he says to Thor that, you know, like, you're not my friend, you're Bruce's friend. And, you know, Thor kind of jokingly says like, no, like I've liked you better, whatever. But we see that insecurity kind of play out, that the Hulk still just wants to be loved and wants to be accepted as he is, in his full strength and size and all of that. So then eventually, you know, we get to a point where Bruce comes back into control, and we see Bruce having to feel and face that guilt and loss that was caused by everything that transpired. But ultimately, it was Bruce's like humanity, his love and his connection to Natasha, but also to Earth and to his heart that brought him back into control. And it was almost like, reflecting on it now, like I feel like it was almost like the Hulk, you know, can physically protect, but like he wasn't prepared to feel that, you know, heart-based energy and that humane energy. So he let Bruce come back into control to then protect him. So we see this different relationship start to form. And then, you know, the movie goes on, Bruce is in control, but then again in the final battle of the final fight of the movie, we see Bruce acknowledge that he needs the Hulk, that Bruce is of no contribution to what is happening in the moment in this fight. Like when Thor is fighting Hela, when the when the Asgardians, when they're trying to save a whole like planet of people. So then Bruce jumps out and lands like flat on his face, and usually the Hulk comes out immediately, but it's like the Hulk like had a little bit of punishment to him, made him wait a moment. But it wasn't until like all of the people that they were trying to save were in close danger that the Hulk did come out, and he used his strength, he used his teamwork, he used his bravery, his Hulk smashing and all of that to save the day. So again, we see this different kind of relationship where Bruce is starting to like really acknowledge, even more so than he did in the first two Avengers movies, that the Hulk has this great strength that is of like great power and benefit when he is needed. And Bruce called on the Hulk to come out and to help protect not only him but everyone else that was involved. So then we see the Hulk again in Infinity War, and Infinity War opens with Thanos meeting the Asgardians like on the ship that they just rescued everyone on, and basically massacring so many people. And the Hulk, we see the Hulk kind of feel defeated and feel useless because he tried to go up against Thanos and was easily smacked away. And we see the Hulk kind of, the shadow version, have to kind of confront that he wasn't strong enough to actually help and to actually save people in that situation. So that when the Hulk is sent back to Earth, immediately it is Bruce. And through this whole Infinity War movie, we only see Bruce, like except for those first few minutes when we see the Hulk. Bruce is in control the rest of the time. And in when they're fighting on Wakanda, like we see Bruce saying like, oh, even actually before that, when they're in New York, and they're starting to initially come to get the Infinity Stones, Bruce can't make the Hulk come out, and he's calling on the Hulk. He's like, Hulk, like I need you, I need you to come and fight and be here. And the Hulk is suppressing himself because he felt so defeated, and because he's felt so like unappreciated and disconnected from Bruce for so long, it's like he's finally at this moment where he's like, Bruce, I'm not gonna let you just use me in these moments and then disregard me. So then we see this whole movie where, the Hulk will not come out. The Hulk will not show himself. And then at the end of the movie, we see Bruce like say something to the effect of, like Hulk, like, we have a lot to figure out. We see actually one tiny part where, Bruce is kind of like, Hulk, like I need you. And he's trying to change into the Hulk. And then the Hulk's head kind of comes out and be like, no, like I'm not coming out. So the Hulk is like actively trying to keep himself in, as opposed to Bruce suppressing him. But then at the end, Bruce is like, yeah, Hulk, we need to figure this out. So then we go into Endgame, which is 5 years later from Infinity War. And this is where we meet, Smart Hulk. I'm pretty sure he's referred to. We see the integrated version of Bruce and the Hulk. So he's not quite as big and mean as the Hulk, but we see there's been a fusion of the greatest strengths of both. We see Bruce's intelligence, his like his intelligence is probably his greatest gift, his mind and mental capacity as Bruce. And then we see also the strength of the Hulk infused into this one version. And this is where we see, like this, all that was leading up to that moment was this journey of Bruce accepting the shadow part of himself, accepting that the shadow part of himself had these great gifts that were being brought into the world, and that it needed, in order for Bruce to access that strength within him, it needed to come out through his shadow of the Hulk, through this like separate version of him that he wasn't identifying with, that he didn't see as a part of him in that moment. And it all led to him like really reevaluating that relationship with that part of himself and finding a way to integrate the actual amazing, beautiful, beautiful parts into his already existing amazing parts. Like he didn't need to completely abandon his intelligence and his all of the amazing things about Bruce in order to access his strength. And he didn't need to abandon his strength and his power in order to access his intelligence and his drive and his all of these other things. So there was an integration. And this is the journey when we look at our own shadows. Excuse me. When we look at our own shadows, it comes, our shadows serve this really beautiful gift and this really beautiful quality in our life, because there are things that we can do when we are only triggered and when we are only acting from a shadow way. And that may be, to tell someone off that has been mistreating us. It may be to throw things that we own away, like these things that we are unwilling to do when we're not embracing that part of ourselves. But then, we're triggered and the shadow comes out and suddenly we can do all of these things. And those things are so serving to your life, but it's like you need that shadow version to be able to do that. But then when you reject and shame that part of yourself, you're not acknowledging and accepting and embracing the gifts that they bring into your life. So that part of you gets denied. And it's about reevaluating that and taking the beautiful qualities so that you can utilize those qualities within yourself without it needing to come out in a destructive way. So then after Endgame, we see Bruce again in the She-Hulk series, only in like the first couple of episodes and then right at the end as well. And when we see Bruce, like he's in Bruce form again. Like the integrated Hulk is gone. Actually, we see him in some like end credit scenes as well. I'm not including them because it's only like little snippets. But when we actually get to see Bruce through a story again, it's in She-Hulk. So we see that he's worked out a way to just become Bruce again, but it isn't long until he becomes Smart Hulk again, and he's no longer losing control. Like it's like he's past that losing control. He is integrated, but it's like there's still this little piece of him that is maybe thinking he's better just as Bruce. Not going into like the full detail there. And then at the end, we see him come back and he has a son. He has a son that is like in kind of Hulk form. And I'm sure that will lead down many new challenges. Like I have no idea where they're going to take the Hulk story next in the MCU, but I'm excited to see it. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. And now that Bruce has really accepted these shadow parts of himself and integrated into his gift, he can move into different challenges, like into a new challenge. And I'm not sure if that's going to take him on a whole new story arc or if it's going to continue along these same themes. So that is a little insight into the Hulk's journey. And if you've already seen all of these movies or if you watch them now, I would love to hear little bits that you pick up on seeing the shadow theme played out. Some prompts that I would love to invite you to reflect on is, have you turned any of your shadows into monsters? Are you making any parts of yourself out to be a monster that doesn't deserve the light of day, that needs to be suppressed, rejected, and shoved down? And then looking at what gifts could they bring out into the world and into your life if you treated these parts of yourself with acceptance and with love. And then how could the best qualities of these parts of you become integrated with all parts of you, all the parts that you already love? I would love to reflect on, I would love for you to reflect on this journey within yourself. And again, if you have any revelations or insights, comment them. I would absolutely love to hear about it. All right, so now we're going to talk about Spider-Man and becoming independent within your power. Spider-Man, I think, is the perfect archetype for the 19th gene key. And the 19th gene key, this is the general storyline that we move from the shadow of codependence through the gift of sensitivity into the siddhi of sacrifice. Codependence as a shadow is all about giving your power to an external authority, and to the point that you forget the power that lives within you. And it causes you to lack your own independence, to become codependent to other authorities or other sources of power and energy. And this ultimately disconnects you from the power that you naturally draw from other realms of energy. And this codependence, I'm going to talk about how it appears in Spider-Man, but it can be linked to like God, it can be linked to organized religion, it can be linked to government, it can be to other people, it can be to anything that you see as a source of power that is greater to you. And there's nothing wrong with being like interdependent with other sources of power, but in this 19th gene key, like the shadow journey is that you become so codependent that you forget your own power. And then we move into the gift of sensitivity. And this gift of sensitivity is about living in the world of energy and patterns with this increased sensitivity that connects you to the energy of all creatures. You become independent in your power. And, Spider-Man with his, Peter Tingle or Spidey senses, that is such a beautiful representation of this gift of sensitivity, which Spider-Man is always drawing on. And then we come to the siddhi, the divine gift of sacrifice, which is a quantum leap from independence to interdependence. It's about this such a deep connection to all creatures and a connection to sacrifice. And I'm going to talk about how sacrifice plays out in Peter Parker, Spider-Man's journey within Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man within the MCU. And I have the Uncle Ben famous quote here: with great power comes great responsibility. And this is such a powerful message for the 19th gene key that, with your power, you are responsible for that power. And when you become codependent with your power, you're not being responsible with the power that you have. And we will see how that can play out in destructive ways within the MCU as well. So here are the movies that Spider-Man has been in, like through Tom Holland within the MCU so far. When we first meet a young Peter Parker through Tom Holland within the MCU, we meet him in Civil War. He's only in this movie for a very little bit. But we just see that, he's recently got his powers. We don't see the like full origin of the spider bite like we have in the Andrew Garfield or Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. But we see like this young Peter Parker who is very much emulating the, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that Spider-Man is known for and that Peter Parker ultimately wants to be as his teenage self. And in this movie, we see that he is recruited by Tony Stark. So this is the beginning of his relationship with Tony Stark. And Tony gives him, we see Peter as he just, I think when we meet him, he walks in and he was just like dumpster diving or something like. So we see that, he doesn't have a lot of resources in many ways. So he meets Tony and, Tony is Iron Man. The world knows that he is Iron Man and a rich billionaire as well and a genius as well. And we also know that like Peter is a genius as well. So Tony comes in and offers him this opportunity to come and fight with him and for him. And I don't think Tony really explains much about why this fight is happening in Civil War and all of that. I won't get into all of that. But Tony is immediately, inserts himself as Peter's mentor and guide, and he gives Peter this new suit and these new resources. And being a young teenager, I think Peter's meant to be like 14 or 15 in this movie. He begins, this is the beginning of him idolizing Tony and starting to put some of his power in what Tony is providing him, even though he already has his powers, his spider sense and all of that. So in the first full Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Homecoming, we see we see Peter's codependence to Tony and his suit play out. And there's a lot of things that happen in this movie, but I think one of the most powerful lines, like, to really demonstrate his codependence was when he said to Tony, like, I am nothing without this suit. So Peter basically caused some destruction with good intentions. He was trying to help. And Tony comes and wants to take the suit away because he sees Peter as, abusing it, and yeah, taking advantage of it, basically. So Tony comes and wants to take it away, and Peter says, like, I'm nothing without this suit. And Tony says, if you're nothing without the suit, then, like, maybe you shouldn't have it. Something like that. May not be exact words. So Tony takes the suit, and we see Peter, like, go into this energy of, like, feeling like he can't be a hero and he can't fight it, like, if he doesn't have this suit. But then we see him, without Tony being there, regain some of his independence to be like, no, like, I am powerful within myself. Like, it is me who is the hero, and I don't need the suit. I don't need Tony's support. Like, this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to do it anyway. So we see him go through that journey of, like, starting to gain some of his independence. And then we see Peter Parker again in Infinity War and Endgame. I put them together because like, in Infinity War, he has a much bigger role than he does in Endgame. But we really see it's these two movies, I feel, that really start to show Peter what it means to sacrifice, what sacrifice means when you are the hero. And in Infinity War, at the start of Infinity War, like, Peter sees, there's trouble happening, and he's like, I have to go help. I'm the hero. And we see Peter kind of, like, have these fun and games with it. Like, he's literally in space, bantering with Tony, like, wanting to help and wanting to do these things, but it's almost like it's still a game to him. But then at the end of Infinity War, everyone gets snapped away, including Peter Parker, Spider-Man. And I feel like that was maybe, like, the first time that it really dawned on him, like, the stakes that were involved with what they were fighting for, and the sacrifices that would have to be made. So then we see in Endgame, spoiler if you haven't seen these movies, but just I'm probably spoiling everything if you haven't seen any of them. In Endgame, they bring everyone back from the snap towards the end of the movie. So we see Peter come back, and he's, obviously is, like, confused, doesn't really fully know what's happening. But we see at the end of the movie, like, Tony, his mentor, sacrifices himself to save everyone. And again, like, Peter is confronted with, like, this is what it means to be a hero, to sacrifice. And that, because Peter has this such strong connection to the story arc of this 19th Gene Key, like, he has this deeper resonance with the sacrifice than others. Like, not to mention that Tony was his mentor, his guide, like, this person he felt like this deep, strong connection with, but also that, he's starting to realize that, sacrifice is part of being a hero, and it will be in his journey as well. And then we move into Far From Home, and, Tony's gone, and, we see Peter trying to process that and come to terms with it at the start of the movie. But then we see Peter almost immediately, fall into another codependent relationship with the first mentor figure that comes along in Mysterio, in Quentin Beck's Mysterio. So, like, he is obviously, like, he's the villain in disguise as, as a hero from another place in the multiverse. So Peter just immediately trusts him, like, immediately gives his power to him, and becomes codependent, and gives him the thing that he was after, Edith, the glasses that Tony left Peter. He just gives them over. He's become completely, like, codependent at this point, and really just not believing in his power to be a hero without Tony as his mentor. So he'll just give his power to this new mentor. And Mysterio, Quentin Beck, he betrays Peter. So again, Peter is confronted with having to come to terms with how powerful he is, that like he has the power within himself. And this is where we see him in his like full superpower. I think like the most brilliant demonstration of the gift of sensitivity, but also like the full strength and gift of his spider senses in his final fight against Mysterio, where so Mysterio basically has like these drones that create illusions. And Peter basically like senses like what the reality is, like the illusion world and the reality of the world. Like he's connected to both realms of energy in a sense, and uses his sensitivity to that energy to win the fight, basically. So like that is such an amazing amazing illustration of this gift of sensitivity and of Peter's power in his sensitivity to energy and to patterns and all of that. So then again, like he's gained some independence again. But then we meet him again in Spider-Man No Way Home, and immediately we see Peter going back into his shadow of codependency. So at the end of Far From Home, Mysterio, like after he died, he had kind of like a backup plan to reveal Peter's secret identity to the world. So that's how Far From Home ends, and in No Way Home we see it like pick up from there, that everyone knows who Spider-Man is, and everyone thinks that Mysterio was a hero and that Peter like killed him, and that like he's the enemy now, like he's the villain now. So then we see Peter immediately go back into his codependent tendencies, where he goes to Doctor Strange to fix his problems instead of facing them head on within his own power. So Doctor Strange tries to help, but things go wrong. Peter pays the price, and ultimately at the end of the movie makes a devastating sacrifice to sacrifice everyone's to sacrifice the memory of him in the minds of everyone. Through the movie, his Aunt May, his only family, dies. And this is, when we think about Tony dying, then Aunt May dying, like he's literally like alone. He has his friends and a couple of people. And I'm gonna skip a lot of detail here, but basically, like his only living family, like his mother figure dies in front of him and he can't save her. So then the person that is responsible for ending his aunt's life, like he has the opportunity to take revenge, to, avenge his Aunt May's life. And we see him really channel this siddhi of sacrifice in this moment, where he sacrifices his revenge, he sacrifices his lower nature in order to be the hero, in order to uphold his leadership and the values that he knows his Aunt May would have wanted, and that he knows he's powerful enough to do within himself. So we first see that sacrifice of his lower nature, and then we see him make that ultimate sacrifice of everyone's memory of him, and we see him left alone at the end of the movie, forced into his own full independence. And I'm so interested to see where they take his story next, whether he is going to fall back into that codependence. But now, because no one remembers Peter at the end of Far From Home, like it's almost like he's forced to be independent. And I would love to see him keep and maintain that independence, to really go into his power in a deeper way, and to really utilize that gift of sensitivity and the power that is within him to be independent. And he's already channeling those aspects of sacrifice. And it's so interesting, the animated Spider-Man like Into the Multiverse trailer. I've been seeing that everywhere at the moment, and like there's this one line in it where it's about, like, if you haven't seen it, it's like the Miles Morales version of Spider-Man. And it's like the multiverse, there's like heaps of different Spider-Mans, and one of them says like being Spider-Man is about sacrifice. So I think that was like, I kept hearing that as I was like preparing this. So it's so interesting that that is encoded across all Spider-Man that it's always about sacrifice. Like in the original, or like in the previous, like Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire movies, like it was Uncle Ben who died. Like it was like he had to be sacrificed in order for Peter to really learn to take responsibility for his power. And that is just a common story thread that is across all Spider-Man iterations. So what will come next for Spider-Man and Peter Parker, we will see, but I would love to see him remain in his independence and not become codependent to another mentor or like high authority type of figure. Like I really see Peter stepping into his leadership while he's in his independence and creating those interdependent relationships as well. So some prompts for you to play with is, where do you see your power coming from? Are you seeing your power come from external sources, or are you seeing your power come from within you? And what gives you the power to do something? Again, is it internal or is it external? And just reflecting on them. And is there anything that you see as being more powerful than you in terms of the actions you can take, the decisions you can make? Is there a codependence anywhere in your life that is diluting your experience with your own power? And then reflecting on like, what kind of leader do you want to be? And you can also expand that to like, what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of hero do you want to be? What kind of qualities and gifts within yourself do you want to embrace? And what power do you need to utilize and source from within yourself in order to be that kind of leader and to step into that role? So that is all for this first step within this leadership keys exploration. In 2, 3, and 4, again, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about the 31st, 21st, and 7th gene keys. The characters are going to be Steve Rogers, T'Challa, and Aunt May. We're actually going to talk about for the 7th gene key, and there's so many other characters I'm going to bring up as connected relationships with those as well. So I would love for you to be back for part 2, 3, and 4. I hope you've enjoyed this. Reach out to me if you have anything to say at Gene Keys with Rachel on Instagram. Connect with me there. I would love for you to drop in and say hello. I hope you have enjoyed this journey. Have an amazing and beautiful day, and keep exploring your gene keys, story archetypes, and whatever drew you into this in whatever way your curiosity leads you. Thank you so much. Bye.